You know the feeling? You walk into a crowded room, a mall, a train station, a concert, and within minutes, something shifts. Your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, your brain starts scanning for the exit. It's not fear exactly, it's not a panic attack. It's something deeper, like your entire nervous system just turned up the volume and you can't find the dial. Most people chalk it up to introversion, but the science points to something more specific and more interesting than that. Here's what's actually going on. Discomfort in crowded places is remarkably common. If you've ever turned around in a doorway because a restaurant was too packed, or chosen a longer route to avoid a busy street, you're not alone. And you're not unusual. But most conversations about crowd aversion stop at one word: introversion. And while introversion is part of the picture for some people, framing it that way misses the more interesting question. Because what's actually happening when you feel overwhelmed in a crowd isn't just a personality preference. It's a measurable chain of biological events, involving your sensory system, your stress hormones, and your brain's spatial mapping. And those systems don't care whether you call yourself an introvert or not. The first layer is sensory. In 1997, psychologists Elaine and Arthur Aaron at Stony Brook University identified a trait they called sensory processing sensitivity, a measurable difference in how deeply the brain processes incoming information. This isn't about having better hearing or sharper eyesight. It's about what happens after the signal arrives. People high in SPS process sensory input more thoroughly. They notice subtleties others miss, but they also reach their processing limit faster. Roughly 15 to 20% of the population scores high on this trait. And it's not just a human phenomenon. SPS has been documented in over 100 other species, from fish to primates, which suggests it's not a quirk, but an evolutionarily conserved strategy. fMRI research, led by Bianca Azevedos and the Aarons at UC Santa Barbara, found that high SPS individuals show stronger activation in the insula, a brain region involved in integrating sensory information with internal awareness, and in the mirror neuron system, which underpins empathy and self-other processing. This matters because it means a crowded environment doesn't just feel loud to a sensitive person. It feels like more information to sort, more emotional data from the people around them, more microsignals to process simultaneously. A systematic review published in Applied Psychology, Health and Well-Being confirmed the link. Across multiple studies, higher sensory processing sensitivity was consistently associated with higher levels of self-reported stress. And the sources of that stress included exactly the stimuli you'd encounter in a crowd: noise, lights, movement, and the presence of many people at once. Think of it this way. If most people are running a basic scan of their environment, registering the broad strokes and filtering the rest, someone high in SPS is running a deep scan. Every input gets processed more thoroughly. That's useful in a quiet forest. In a train station at rush hour, it's overwhelming. But sensory processing is only the first layer. The second is hormonal. When you're surrounded by noise and unpredictable stimuli, your brain doesn't process it as neutral information. It activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the same stress pathway that fires in response to threat. The result is cortisol release, elevated heart rate, and sympathetic nervous system activation. Your body enters a low-grade fight-or-flight state, not because the crowd is dangerous, but because the sensory load triggers the same cascade. This isn't a metaphor, it's measurable. Research from the University Medical Center Mainz demonstrated that even moderate environmental noise exposure activates this hormonal pathway, producing increases in cortisol, noradrenaline, and markers of oxidative stress. And the scale of this effect is staggering. The World Health Organization estimates that at least 1 million healthy life years are lost annually in Western Europe from traffic-related noise alone, through sleep disruption, cardiovascular strain, and chronic stress. More than 100 million people in Europe are exposed to noise levels that the WHO considers harmful. For someone whose sensory system already processes more deeply, this background stress load is amplified. The crowd isn't just unpleasant, it's physiologically expensive. So if sensory processing and stress hormones explain the discomfort, here's where it gets more interesting. Because there's a third layer that most explanations miss entirely: spatial violation. Humans maintain an invisible boundary around their bodies, what researchers call personal space. Anthropologist Edward T. Hall documented this in the 1960s, identifying 4 distinct spatial zones: intimate, personal, social, and public. In a crowd, your personal zone is systematically compressed. Strangers enter your intimate space, the zone normally reserved for people you trust. And research on crowding and stress suggests that when this compression is perceived as involuntary and uncontrollable, it triggers a distinct stress response, separate from noise or sensory load. The perceived loss of spatial control matters more than the density itself. This is a key distinction. A concert can be packed and you might enjoy it. Because you chose to be there, you can leave, and the crowd shares a purpose. A rush hour subway car has the same density but feels unbearable because the crowding is forced, escape is limited, and the strangers around you aren't a community. They're obstacles. The variable that changes your experience isn't how many people are present. It's how much control you feel you have. This means that hating crowded places isn't one thing. It's at least 3 things happening at once. And the people who feel it most strongly tend to be those whose systems process all 3 more intensely. And there's a critical nuance here. Sensory processing sensitivity is not a disorder. The Aarons have been explicit about this from the beginning. It's a normal variation in temperament, not a diagnosis. It sits on a different spectrum entirely from clinical conditions like agoraphobia, which affects roughly 1% of the U.S. adult population and involves persistent, disproportionate fear and avoidance. Most people who dislike crowded places don't have agoraphobia. They have a nervous system that's doing exactly what it evolved to do: monitoring the environment deeply, flagging sensory overload, and signaling when the cost of staying exceeds the benefit. What's counterintuitive is that this same sensitivity, the trait that makes crowds exhausting, is associated with deeper empathy, heightened awareness of subtlety, and more thorough processing of positive experiences too. The trait doesn't just amplify the negative, it amplifies everything. Here's what the research actually shows. Disliking crowded places isn't a personality flaw or a sign of social anxiety. It's the product of a measurable sensory trait, a predictable hormonal response, and a spatial boundary system that modern environments routinely overwhelm. And it's not rare. Roughly 1 in 5 people processes sensory information at this deeper level. In a world where urban density keeps increasing, where ambient noise is a documented public health burden, and where social pressure pushes people toward louder, more crowded spaces, that's a significant portion of the population whose environments are consistently working against their neurobiology. The critical insight isn't that some people can't handle crowds. It's that some people's brains are doing more in those environments, processing more information, generating more empathetic responses, running deeper simulations of the social landscape. And the cost of that processing shows up as exhaustion, overstimulation, and the powerful urge to leave. Knowing this won't make the subway less loud or the shopping mall less packed, but it might change how you interpret the impulse to leave. That impulse isn't weakness, it's information. Your nervous system telling you something that, for most of human history, was worth listening to. This is part of a larger pattern in how modern environments were designed without considering the full range of human sensory experience, and what it costs the people whose systems are running at a higher resolution. This is the human frame. Facts first. Context always. If this changed how you see something, subscribe. We'll keep going.